What causes an individual to turn to their shadow finally? If they're lucky enough.
Well, life just doesn't work. It just doesn't work. Or the same problems keep coming up over and over and over again.
Questions about authenticity, intentionality, or living our highest potential, and words like extrovert and introvert or the Myers-Briggs personality test all come to us from the Jungian tradition, a branch of depth psychology that is connected to psychotherapy. While Freud brought attention to our unconscious and our childhood traumas, Jung, his student, but also his descendant, took things a bit further and connected our parental issues and existential dilemmas to the world of the collective. And yes, the mysterious world of the spirit. Depression, for example, would be considered a problem of the soul, not just a brain chemical mishap.
Welcome to another episode of the Soulspace podcast. We are your hosts, Adrian and Thal. Today we are joined by Zurich-trained Jungian Analyst and psychotherapist Christina Becker. We talk about the deeper psychology behind some of our first world problems and explore the hidden aspects of the human psyche. She even guides us through a live dream interpretation. Christina has a private psychotherapy practice in Toronto and is also a consultant in the business world. She has a background in music and is the author of the book The Heart of the Matter, Individuation as an Ethical Process. We begin with Christina's personal journey to becoming a Jungian analyst, a calling that came to her when she was in India in search of meaning in her life. It is our pleasure to bring you Christina Becker.
Welcome, Christina.
Thanks. Nice to be here.
What was it that attracted you to your current calling?
It's a great question. I was thinking about that. It actually started when I was about, I think it was about 20 or 21, 22, so a long time ago. And my former mother-in-law gave me my first book on Jungian psychology, and it started our lifelong journey of just engaging with the material, understanding. There was something about Jung that was so intriguing and engaging for me. I think, and I've thought a lot about this, and I think it had something to do with how he looked at every aspect of the human condition. You know, the way we pray or the way we worship, our rituals, our dream life, how we organize in societies, you know, all of that. And it was just so deeply fascinating. And so I think mainly my journey started just for me because I was really interested, and you know, I went into a Freudian analysis at the beginning, and then but was continuing to read, and at some point I had this idea that I would like to train. And I was at a point in my other career which was just a little lifeless and meaningless, and so I thought, well, what would I like to do? And I decided to go to Zurich just to train and just actually to see whether that was going to be my calling.
What were you doing at the time? I'm curious.
Yeah, for sure.
Career?
I was, and I still am actually, I was mainly a consultant for arts and communications, nonprofit arts and culture organizations in Ontario and Canada, and I was quite successful at it, did projects all across the country, had my own business, and I thought to myself, do I really want to do this for the rest of my life? You know, it was at a time when the arts community was out of money. There wasn't a lot of energy. So what was going on was, people were really struggling. People were getting low pay. It was just a really difficult time in the whole community. And I think there was this need to think about something new for the community. And it just got to be really onerous and boring. So I decided to take actually about four years to really give myself the permission to decide what I was going to do next. And that was when I was about 37. So and decided on a trip to India that I would go to Zurich and at least just see if this is what was what I wanted to do. And it turned out that it was, so it's all good.
I'm curious what drew you to India when that moment came. What was the original motivation to go
Well,
there?
we'd always, I was married at the time, we always wanted to go to India, and so it was kind of like a spiritual pilgrimage. So we went and did like the whole country in like 5 weeks. It was quite amazing, and I remember quite distinctly and when the decision came. And I think that's how the psyche works. We have these moments, these liminal moments where something kind of breaks through, and I'm in a bus up these windy roads in southern India, and there are all these tea plantations on the side, and we're going up and up and up, and of course there's a big cliff on one side. It's kind of and at some point I was just there, and it was just really quiet, and I just said, what do I want to do? And what came up like just from the depth was, I want to train. I want to go to Zurich. So so that was in 1995, and I think I went in, my first semester was October 97.
And so before deciding to train, you've always been reading Jungian, the material, always engaged with it.
And in an analysis and reading and working on my dreams, and fascinated about just the journey.
Yeah, we can go so many directions. I'm thinking about, because I'm really curious about those early years too, like the training.
Yeah, for sure.
So maybe we can explore that a little bit. Was talk about what the training was like. Being in Zurich, because you lived there.
Yep.
While you were studying.
Yeah. I in the first half of the program, I came back between semesters, so I lived there for 3, 4, 5 months at a time, came back for 3 months, and then went back. So that was the first half of the program. And then I took a year off, mainly because my marriage fell apart, and so we needed to do, sell the house and do a number of things like that. And then I went back and lived there for two years. And I loved being in Switzerland because of the landscape. It's a beautiful, beautiful country. And the training was wonderful, and I met so many different people from all over the world who I still know and connect with every once in a while, which is fantastic. It's really important to understand, I think, how Jung created Jungian psychology, if in that valley of Lake Zurich, because it is so, you do feel like you're in a little protected valley. And Zurich is a very small city, and the lake is beautiful, and it's easy to get around. And
sound like an idyllic learning experience, which
idyllic, mostly idyllic. The important thing I think about, that's why I question about idyllic, because I don't know whether it's totally idyllic. The idea is that if you're removed from your regular routine, home, family, work, business, all of that, that you get a deeper and a richer experience of the psyche. And so that idea of being in a kind of a monastery kind of feel is both challenging and very enriching. And so you get a certain depth that you don't quite get. And you have some certain challenges that you don't quite get either if you're just doing your training, like you're commuting or something like that. So people who have done a training in Zurich have a particular experience. Well, and the training has changed a little bit, so this would be an indication of training at a particular time where you're in a foreign country that you don't necessarily know the language very well, and you're away from your support networks. So it does, people get a little depressed, they get lonely. You have to kind of rely on your own resources, find things to do, especially in off semester, second half. But anyways, yeah.
So for those who may not be familiar with depth psychology, would you care to maybe explain how it might differ from the common ideas around what psychology is? And
yeah, for sure. That's a big subject.
It is, and I was thinking about the intersection between art and science and Jungian psychology.
Yeah, for sure.
Especially you come from an arts background.
I'm actually doing some research on that around So, one of the things that Jung kind of emphasized is the psychology that we have come to know is like a psychology without soul. And I think that is where the intersection lies between the spiritual path and the psychological path. So, and this happens, and it was the major rift between Freud and Jung. And the rift was that Freud, talked a lot about the drives and the instincts and repression, which was really, really valid. However, his perspective suggested that if you could uncover what you repressed when you were a child, then everything was going to be right as rain. And Jung felt that there was something really much stronger in that, and that there was going to be there was something that moves us through life, which he identified as the soul. So, and that, I think, is the major difference. With the depth psychology, you're looking at what's underneath the surface, not just about, what happened to us when we're kids, but how do we make life meaningful? How do we live a fulfilled life? How do we live the life that we're meant to live according to some deeper energy that is actually moving us forward in whatever way that it wants to? And that would be this essence of individuation. So I think that that with this movement back towards science, quantum physics, and the new sciences, which is where psychology, energy psychology, all of that starts to move towards more of an integration of what was split a long time ago. Because if I actually look at the origin of the word psychology, it is the study of the soul, psyche, right? And that's what the original humanists, how they use that. And so we've forgotten. There's a quote that I often use, and I'm using it in my book, is like, you have to pity poor psychology. First it lost its soul, then its mind, then its behavior, and now it's having trouble with its attitudes or something like that. So, there is modern psychology, which has tried to which has been aligned with the medical model, only goes so far. And I think there's a movement back towards a deeper deeper understanding of what contributes to a life well lived.
Would it be fair if, even for myself, the word soul, pretty loaded word, and if it, sometimes it could actually be a barrier. But when I hear it and the way you're describing it, it almost sounds synonymous with depth.
Yeah, for sure.
Like a life that lacks soul is a life that lacks depth.
Yeah.
And that to me actually is what makes this conversation very relevant. Personally, 3 years ago was when I decided to leave my industry to go ask some of these bigger questions. And I remember two things really stuck out soon after I quit. One of them was I remember reading about the article, this famous article about a palliative nurse that spent a lot of her work around patients that were dying, that were terminally ill.
Yeah.
And so she wrote, I believe, an article which later became a book about the top regrets of the dying. And it just jumped out at me that the number one most common regret was people feeling like they didn't live a life true to themselves, and rather they lived one that others expected of them.
Perfect.
And
Beautiful.
that just put into words a lot of the experiences that I was going through, and then starting to realize that I wasn't alone. That actually this seems to me like a cultural thing of the modern times.
Yeah, for sure.
And which is why this whole conversation around soul and depth is now becoming at the forefront of a lot of my personal conversations with friends and family. Why do you think that is, this meaning crisis that we seem to all be experiencing in different ways, be happening right now?
Well, actually, it's not just happening right now. It's been a long time coming. It's been a long time coming, and if you ever want to read about the philosophical, read Richard Tarnas's Cosmos and Psyche. The first couple of chapters talk totally about this, and it is. I'm kind of a armchair philosopher, so it has to do with the split between science and religion, and a very rational intellectual viewpoint, a causal viewpoint of how the universe works, which kind of arose, so like Descartes says, I think, therefore I am. Well, that's not all that we are. So there was a certain kind of mindset that happened in, after the age of the Enlightenment, early 1800s or so, where all of a sudden we human beings thought that we were the center of the universe, and that the ego was the center of the universe, and so every problem that we have, including the environment, our relationship to our bodies, relationship to our children, all come from this egotistical, I hate to say, Western attitude where the ego is paramount over everything else. And so that has created an incredible void in terms of meaning and depth. So, for most people, the connection to God or to some kind of spiritual pattern has, because it's become dogmatic. It actually religion doesn't actually answer some of those soul questions. And Jung talked about the fact that we are inherently spiritual. We want meaning. That's how come astrology actually got involved, because we want to see our place in the universe. We want to understand our relationship to to what this is. Why am I here? Like, what's going on here, right? And so that was why he talked about, there's a great quote, which I will find in a minute, about what he said in terms of his last letter, which was, his greatest aim was to say that our philosophy, our religion is in a lamentable state because we've lost this connection with ourselves. So I think that, I think part of the crisis is also a crisis of human consciousness as a whole that is shifting. And we've been shifting for a long time, 20 years, maybe 30 years. It may take a while for the entire species to kind of start to look at life in a different way. But there's lots of evidence with this kind of unity consciousness that a lot of people are talking about, where we are part of the whole, we are part of the one. And if we're part of the one in a holistic way, just like the indigenous people speak about, then we have to have respect for other people, for our animals, for the environment. Right? It's a whole mindset. Does that answer your question? I tend to go off on the.
Yeah, if not, maybe I wasn't really hunting for a singular answer, but what it helps is to actually complexify the question a little bit more, right? To understand that there's a lot of dimensions to this thing, whatever you want to call it, meaning crisis, first world problems. I think often people joke about first world problems, but to me that is the same connection to these existential crises that people are experiencing.
And in many ways, there are people have sort of an allergic reaction to the word spiritual, the word God, and I think it's also part of the meaning crisis and the way we use our language and the way we use words. So what do you see your role in this sort of current collective meaning crisis?
Well, that's actually kind of interesting because I see that I've got kind of three roles, and one of the things that I've been very conscious about is using social media to put forward messages of positivity, compassion, things that are relevant to every day but are really positive. So refrain from engaging in Twitter wars or anything like that. So I always choose things that feel uplifting for me, that are really important for me. So because I think that those kinds of messages are really, really important right now. In terms of my personal work, like in terms of my work with clients, trying to get them to engage with themselves and to understand themselves and to connect with themselves. How do they feel? What do they need? What are their desires? What are the obstacles in terms of living their individuation, which is a word that indicates living the life that they're meant to live. And that's a very practical, very concrete kind of thing. Some people, want to write, or some people have children, or, want to travel, or, it's anything that actually fulfills us or enriches us, where we kind of go, yeah, like I really get a lot of energy by doing this thing. And that's how we then contribute to society, because then it influences our lives and our relationships and all that kind of stuff. And I think the other thing is in my writing. So I do a monthly blog, and I try to synthesize what's going like a topic and try to bring Jung in, but always try to do it in a way that I hope in supports people's journeys, like it opens their minds a little bit or a little perspective or something like that. So recently I've written about my trips to Peru. I just wrote yesterday on the whole political rhetoric, which I felt really important, that it was really that I needed to talk about that, and because also Jung has written about that, and I thought it was really important to share what he had talked about. And and he had talked about it in connection with Hitler and World War II in Germany. So it's a little scary because that same kind of energy is what we're watching south of the border. Now, whether what it turns into, we don't know, but I felt that was important to write about, but not in a way that is attacking, but in a way that brings clarity and light and perspective. And I think that's how I see my role.
You're touching on quite a few things I'm really curious about with technology and culture.
Yeah.
What the word coming to my mind is shadow. This is the shadow of our technology.
Yes, right.
Which is actually a term that Jung popularized in relation to the psyche.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear a little bit about, for people who aren't familiar, how you consider the shadow and how you work with it in your practice.
Right, for sure. Well, the shadow, just as an idea, is anything that is in us that we find unacceptable for whatever reason. I mean, it usually gets born when we're growing up and we're trying to be who we are, and we get a message that says you can't be that because it's whatever. And so then my image is always that part of ourself goes into a closet and is all like thorny and dusty and all that kind of stuff, and kind of sits there for a good long time, and by the time the door opens it's pretty ornery, right? But that could be a positive thing or it could be a negative thing. It all depends on, lots of people have really great positive characteristics and strengths and gifts that have been put in the shadow because of how they grew up. And because there's always intense emotions around the shadow, it's always a little tenuous to kind of start to approach it, because as soon as you approach it, you're going to have some intense emotion like shame or guilt or fear or something like that. And so needing to approach that is a very important, how you approach that is actually really important. But once those parts of ourselves actually come and get integrated, then we feel more life, because that energy that has been locked away for such a long time has also draws life energy away from it, so that we don't have it available. So the same thing can be said for collectives or groups. So as soon as you kind of get into that's not us, that's not, we're like this, and then the collective shadow gets projected onto another group of people. And I wrote about this in my book, The Heart of the Matter, Individuation as an Ethical Process, where, which I wrote about in the early 2000s, and in fact it's still true. But you can see certainly certain Western countries, project the evil other onto some of the Eastern countries. And so then they have to eradicate that evil in the other, right? But it's all psychological, because in fact they're trying to eradicate whatever they've projected, their own thing that they projected onto the other. And for me, it seems so evident that while the United States is fighting terrorism in other countries and saying terrorism is bad, meanwhile the number of gun deaths in that country is like phenomenal. Like last night there's like another 12 people who were killed because somebody has a gun. So they have, you know, there's something about not attending to what's in one's borders, literally, both if that's a group, that's an individual, that's a country, that's a company, right? And then it gets projected out, and then you start to fight it outside of yourself, but not attending to what's inside.
Yeah, and become trapped in like polemics. And,
yeah, exactly.
What causes an individual to turn to their shadow finally, if they're lucky enough?
Well, life just doesn't work. It just doesn't work. Or the same problems keep coming up over and over and over again. I mean, the shadow for is usually the same gender. So for men, it is other men. For women, it's other women. And so if you have if you've got like continual issues with people of the same gender, you've got pretty clear that there's a shadow aspect there. Yeah. So I think it usually has something to do with. I think it's usually the crisis in one's life that sends the people into therapy, and then they have to deal with the shadow just as a consequence of that. Just because that's just the way it goes, right? That's just how the process works.
So usually when, like shit hits the fan, that people start to pay attention.
Yeah, exactly. So you've lost a job, or you've lost a relationship, or, something's happened in your environment that all of a sudden that comes up as a huge wake-up call. And they kind of go, oh, okay, there's something really not right here. I got to figure that out, because I don't know what it is, but there's something I'm not doing, or the life I'm not living, right?
Yeah. I wanted to continue a little bit of that thread with technology. I think it was 2013, that was the year where the selfie became the word of the year. And so we've collectively invented this terminology to represent this behavior, this tendency for us to want to create and construct a social persona. And the whole idea of a persona, I never realized actually has roots to Jung as well, and how the idea emerged in psychology. Can you talk a little bit about how the persona and in today's world can be functional or dysfunctional in the way that we're contributing to it?
Great question. We do need a persona. We have to have a persona. But I think that you made the really important key distinction, which is, is it a functional persona or it's a dysfunctional persona? So the idea of persona, actually, I think, Jung coined it, and it means mask, and it comes from Greek theater, right, where the Greek actors put on a mask. So there's something about the acting and something about role. So when we're in our persona, we're in our role. So, and usually roles define profession or parents or societal relationships or whatever. So, our role, my role as analyst is different than my role as dog owner or neighbor or friend or daughter or sister, right? I have those roles. So often society defines what those roles are, and so we can align with that or not. So, and a functional persona is where the persona actually aligns with the personality. So there's a sense of integrity. So who I am in my role is not disconnected from who I am as a person. It's a recognition that I have a role in this particular context, especially professional roles. I have a role in a professional context which has certain expectations and obligations and things like that, and I need to fulfill that. Where the dysfunction comes in was where the persona is disconnected from our individuality and our identity. So then we just act like we are expected to. And so many people do that. Like they make decisions because of what other people think they should do or what society thinks they should do. Well, I have to have get a university degree and get married and have a house in the suburbs, 2-car garage, and, 2.5 kids. That's the kind of the collective trajectory. And if you buy into that, which, but that it doesn't really reflect who you are, then you're just acting out a role that is disconnected, and that's dysfunctional. So, I often lead an exercise in one of my classes where I ask people to list all of the roles that they have in their life, and then do reflect on, does that really reflect who they are? And then have a discussion about that. So the other interesting thing is that the persona and the shadow are always linked. They're kind of like two halves of the, right? So we've got the outer face of the persona, but the inner shadow. So what you're trying to put forward in one's life, if it's disconnected from your identity, then it's going in the shadow.
That's fascinating. Does an example come to mind?
I was just thinking that poor Tony Clement, right? The MP, who got himself into a little bit of a mess. A couple of people, actually, politicians, have a certain role. They've got a public role, and meanwhile, the shadow just gets unearthed, and they have to resign. I mean, it's just has to usually. He was in some kind of sexting kind of thing, and he got lured into this relationship, which it just came out in the news and meant that he had to resign. And he's a prominent cabinet. Well, he's not in cabinet anymore, but he's a prominent federal politician. That because he let his shadow out of the bag and wasn't able to understand what that was going to be, is now is now in a deep trouble.
You talked about the persona as a social mask, which is different, but has a relationship to the identity behind it, or the personality. From what I understand with a lot of Jung's ideas was how the personality also is not singular or fixed, and that we have many dimensions to that.
Right.
I'd love to hear you elaborate a little bit about that idea of a multifaceted self.
Could you elaborate on a multifaceted self?
I get this feeling, I mean, just personally, that because I used to just think I was just one self. I mean, my sense of self, to me, for as long as I can remember, felt very fixed and had sort of a central figure in the story. And only recently discovering that, well, actually, there seems to be many characters that are at play here in this drama.
Yeah, for sure.
And yes, and maybe in line with that, distinguishing between self with a small s and self with a
big S.
Yes.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So we do have many characters in our psyche, and Jung called them complexes. And so they are, the theory is that they are kind of self-contained, autonomous energy systems in our psyche that have a tendency to act out and get us into trouble. So that's kind of at so that's at the level of the personal unconscious, and so how the complexes arise out of our own psychology. So, like a complex would be probably experienced as some kind of compulsion, where you feel like you're compelled to do something, but not necessarily in a good way. But we also have energies that are much broader and more spiritual or deeper. And, one could say they are archetypal, although I really resist using the word archetypal because I think that it is so fraught with misinterpretation. I like the word universal better. And so, and so that our psyches then use some of these big images as a way to capture something that's really important for us. So, like images of the Great Mother, right? The goddess images, or wise old men kind of images. And so you can look at films, and one of the reasons why films are so, we resonate with them so clearly is there's something in the image that's just so touches us. So like Lord of the Rings.
I was just thinking Gandalf the Grey,
exactly.
And Dumbledore in another film.
Exactly. And then you've got the other side too. So you've got the evil characters, right, which is about the other side, which are just interested in power, right? So you've got all of that. Part of the work is to understand our inner landscape and to understand who our characters are in our psyche. And the dreams are wonderful to bring those up and to, they kind of outline the landscape. But you could also do an active imagination, which is a technique that Jung developed, which you could also cultivate an inner dialogue or an inner landscape of characters, which you could go to and have conversations with. That was how he developed the Red Book.
Is that a form of meditation, you would say?
It can be. Different people do different things. Sit with meditation, wait until something happens, follow it, write it down, and then just see where it goes. So it's it's not a meditation per se, because in meditation you're trying to stop the thoughts. You're just trying to let the thoughts come and then you let them go. But in an active imagination, if something comes up, you want to follow it and see where it takes you. And that will then also give you a sense of your inner landscape, right?
Since you brought it up, the dreams, I know, is a big, juicy area to explore within Jungian psychology. Why study dreams? Why explore them?
Well, they are, from a Jungian perspective, they are the way that our soul speaks to us. It's a way for the soul to say, okay, I've got something to say about this. I've got something to say about your life. I've got something to say about this relationship or whatever it happens to be. And so that is, I think, the key method of depth. Because we can, from my perspective, we can only go so far to understanding what our own personal psychology is by talking. We can only get so far. But when we throw the dreams in, we get such a different perspective and a richness that allows us to really engage with ourselves in a very poignant way.
I have a feeling that perhaps a lot of listeners have maybe not considered dreams or maybe even devalue as something meaningless or random.
Yeah.
How do you generally approach that type of skepticism around dream work and using the content?
Yeah. Usually I just get somebody, we just work on a dream. And then the proof is in the pudding. And there is such joy and enrichment and holy crap awe when you've worked on a dream and something just opens up and the person gets something that they hadn't gotten before. It's just like the whole body changes, the face changes, and they just go, oh, and then they've just caught something, right? Something has really clicked for them in a way that all came from talking about a dream. And so it's an education process, let's put it that way. It's and I'm still a little surprised when people kind of go, oh, it's just about this, or I had this dream because I had pizza last night or whatever, right? But in fact, Jung said there are no silly dreams, only silly people who will look at dreams. Now, that's his energy, but there's some truth to that, because this is a message from some place that we don't really know where it exists, that is in our best interests, and so why not pay attention to that?
Yeah, like some people refer to dreams as it's like the garbage of what happened during the day.
Yeah,
which is,
right.
Yeah.
Would it be okay if I shared a silly dream of mine
for sure.
from last night, actually?
Yeah,
I'd
how
love
about
to,
that?
Yeah, I'm just thinking, do I remember last night? Actually, I do.
Synchronistic.
Like one of the segments, at least.
Are you prepared?
Yeah, I'm happy to share,
Okay.
because I'm curious, but also kind of confused, too. So as a side question, I'm curious about recurring dreams, because this is a theme, it seems, where I find myself in a hotel. And so it happened last night where I entered a hotel, and I think I was meeting some friends when we go into a suite, and then I was dressed nicely, like in a dress shirt and nice clothes, but fairly sweaty, like realized that I should clean myself before whatever it is that we're doing after. So I asked, the group, is it okay if I run to the washroom, just have a quick shower? And so I go into the washroom, close the door, and actually I lay out all my clothes. They're a little damp and sweaty. And I remember laying my underwear down, it was orange, and spraying like hydrogen peroxide to disinfect like the crotch area. So I don't even know what sort of, like, because I'm telling it, and then the rational part of me is like, that's so silly. Like, why, that's not a good way to clean your underwear.
Right. Well, no, totally. But it's interesting because as you even told the dream, we can't evaluate the dreams from our waking life perspective. It just doesn't work, right? Because the dreams speak to us in a totally different language. So I don't know about the crotch. That would require a little bit more in-depth discussion about that. But however, hotels are often an image of transition. It's a place it's a temporary location. So, I would explore with you what, where are you in a kind of a temporary space, maybe related to your friends. I mean, maybe you're questioning your relationships with friends. Maybe you're saying, oh, I'm not sure about these friends, that kind of stuff. Because there's something that you've entered into this relationship with your friends that's slightly dirty, right? That needs to be cleaned up. So there's an element of the shadow. What needs to be cleaned up in terms of your relationship with this group of people. And so that's kind of where I would start to explore with that. And, we would go into the associations with these friends and who they are and why are they, do you have any sense about who they are and why are you seeing them and all of that kind of stuff.
And to all my dirty friends out there right now listening, they're all self-conscious after hearing your interpretation. Nice.
Did that have some resonance for you?
Totally.
Okay.
What stood out for me was, I actually didn't link how hotels are transitional, temporal places. And so that already has a level of metaphor that is quite powerful.
For sure.
In considering where my current life.
Yeah, for sure. And I could just imagine that you're shifting professions. It sounds like you've been in the corporate world for a while, which had now you're in training to be a therapist. Totally different group of people. That in and of itself is a transition. So the psyche is kind of reflecting that you're in a temporary place. Things are changing. You're away from your home, which is you're away from yourself in some way. So that makes a lot of sense. And so then, and I also know that with lots of people who go into training to be therapists, all of a sudden they do find that their previous friendships don't quite, like there's a shift, right? It's like the people that you really liked before, just they're okay, but somehow they're not speaking to you in the same way as. So.
Yeah.
Which can be a difficult shift.
It can be a difficult shift. Yeah, exactly.
How do you know when to look at a dream literally? And it's because sometimes it can sound very literal, like direct connections to day world events, and then other times, like this example, was very metaphorical and symbolic.
Well, the dreams always speak metaphorically. There are occasions where there's it's an energetic thing. There's a quality of a dream that you actually look at and you kind of go, yeah, I think there's something, especially around premonitions and like if loved ones have died. There's a quality about those dreams that you just kind of go, I think there's something else going on here. It's like, it's not just about a complex or just not about what's going on. It's hard to describe. There's an energetic thing related to that. Yeah.
A liminal space, maybe?
Well, it has that kind of liminal, kind of otherworldly kind of space. Like I can hear it as soon as I hear a dream that has that quality about it. But I can't. It's not fair to jump to conclusions about that, right? Because you still have to treat it subjectively, and it's really hard to know. It's always whether a dream is objective, but it's still symbolic. It doesn't really speak literally, but it's still symbolic. But it may have an outer indication of an objective, some kind of objective reality that you need to have something that you don't know of. So, for instance, actually, this is a perfect example, and this is a dream from Jung. He had a client where the client was a businessman and was just getting involved in a really pretty big business deal. And he had dreams where he had to washing his hands of dirt, like over and over and over again, and couldn't quite get it clean. And the interpretation was that at some level his psyche acknowledged that the deal that he was in wasn't great. He was getting his hands dirty, right? That there was something about the business deal that just wasn't right, And at some level, the businessman acknowledged that there's something wasn't right, but his conscious mind wouldn't let him accept that, right? So the dream had to come and say, hey, wait a second here. There's something up here. There's something which you're not really paying attention to, and you need to pay attention to that because this is not necessarily a good action to follow. So in some ways that reflected an outer situation where, but it was also about, so it was like a warning dream.
So there are different types of dreams then, right? Like the ones that are more anticipatory, ones that are warning, and ones that are recurring, and initiatory dreams. But there are people that don't dream. What about that? And also, on the other side of that, are people that have crippling nightmares. How do they deal with that?
Right. Well, I think everybody dreams. It's just a question of remembering. So it's not, we all dream. So it's just we just don't remember. And there could be lots of reasons for that. Could, like what you eat, if you're using substances, it could suppress the recall. Life is going pretty well. There's not really too much to think about. Recurring dreams are dreams that the dream maker is saying, okay, you're not paying attention. I just have to keep telling you. And so that's why the recurring dreams kind of come up. And if we really don't get the message, the dream maker will deliver a nightmare. And the nightmare will wake you up, literally. Just like I wake up.
Wow.
So think about that as like, you wake up and kind of going, oh my God, right? There's the consciousness that the dream maker is saying, like hitting you over the head with you really have to pay attention to this. And that's kind of what nightmares are, because nightmares, what they do is it's whatever the other energy is in your psyche is so confrontative to the ego's identity and self-perception that the ego can't fathom, like, at all integrating this part, because there's so much emotion attached to it. So fear, shame, a whole bunch of stuff. So so you could get a dream that comes in where, classical, like there's there's something chasing you. And so that's what people will do. They'll often say, well, this thing is chasing me, this dark man is chasing me. And it's a recurring dream. And I kind of go, well, what are you running from? Because that's how you turn it around, right? It's like whatever it is in your psyche that's chasing you wants to connect, like wants to be known, wants to be heard, wants to be felt. And the ego's going, I don't want anything to do with that, right? So in fact, it gets turned around to say, well, what are you running from?
That's pretty cool. Like what came out of that is a question, not an answer that you're able to extract from the dream, but actually a poignant question to bring into focus. When I get those dreams of being chased, it's often I can't actually run as fast as I normally do.
Right.
I'm in molasses. It's like, wait,
He's a fast runner.
I know I can run. I used to do track, and now I can't run.
Right. So there's something really sticky that's gumming up your works.
Yeah, gotta clean those shoes.
Yeah, for sure. I'm mindful of the time, so do you have any closing questions? Do you want to? I think it might be neat to kind of close it up a little bit.
I do have a closing question. I was thinking about so Jungian psychology is finding some kind of a resurgence in social media. Carl Jung's quotes are everywhere. And the term shadow and persona, complexes, introverted, extroverted, which all come from Jungian thought, are always used in the mainstream. How do you feel about maybe things taken out of context, or moving away from the tradition, maybe, like the connection between the form of Jungian psychology and the meaning behind it, the formless?
Well, I think the essence of Jungian psychology is so universal that it's can't really be considered a discipline on its own, because the essence of it is just about being human.
Right. Yeah.
And so you'll notice that one of the analysts that I worked with in Zurich had a wonderful, wonderful image that has stayed with me. And she said, Jung's thoughts are like a polymer bath, right? It's like this big vat of ideas and intuitions and writings and stuff like that. But in the vat, it's all liquid. But we each kind of take our strand out of it. And as soon as we pull it out, that becomes uniquely our part that we're exploring, it solidifies. And so I think that's why there are so many analysts that actually do other things.
Yes.
You know, they're environmentalists, there's professors, there's, you know, I'm a consultant, you know, musicians, all sorts of things, because the ideas, Jung's ideas, need to be brought into the world because it's just so universal. So, you know, there's so many psychotherapies that are originally, you can trace right back to Jung. And that's really fantastic. And that each person has brought in, like IFS, you can trace right back to Jung. You know, parts work, you can trace right back to Jung. It is, you know, psychodynamic psychotherapy, you can trace right back to Jung. So I think, you know, I think we have to be open to adapting to new ideas and new sciences and new ways of thinking of things while being true. And it is actually easy to be true to the original idea, because the original idea is truth. Yes. And is universal. So it's like there's no break. As long as you remain truthful, the language may change, but there's certain ideas that are universal that we can, you know, remain adhered to. We can find resonance to. I do find a little bit of an issue with people using the word archetype, because it is so fraught. And the way that Jung originally used the word is not something that you can just kind of throw around and say, oh, that's the archetype of no, right? Mm-hmm. Because archetypal energy is big, intense energy that overpowers the ego. It's collective energy. It's even deeper energy. So psychosis is often an influx of archetypal energy. Schizophrenia is an influx of archetypal energy. If you think about all of the fantasies of a schizophrenic, you know, it's all archetypal. Like it's, you know, Nazis or Jesus and stuff like that. So that's the flood. And that flood of archetypal energy, a huge energy, you know, swamps us. So it's not something that we want to be playing around with.
Right.
We need to have a tremendous amount of respect for, and we have to have a proper relationship to it, or we can go mad. Mm-hmm. And that's just, we've seen that, you know, time and time again in so many different places where people have, you know, breaks, mm-hmm. psychotic breaks.
Absolutely.
Christina, mindful of your time. I feel like there's definitely going to be a part 2, because we've opened so many files. We're not ending, you know, the conversation here. But yeah, thank you for your time today.
Thank you. It's my
starting
pleasure.
The conversation.
Great.
Thank you so much. It's an honor.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay.
There is a kernel of truth in everything. Keep sweeping the grounds of your being. Let no piece of you escape to the shadows. Sweep en masse. Enter your darkness. Do not just tread the peripheries. Your pain is ancient. Merge into your madness. Listen to the melodies of every crack, every whimper. Append your veins with the old branches of a tree in a forest of Canadian winter. Sweep en masse. Extend upwards, extend inwards. Now you burn a light. Keep sweeping the vestiges of your ego, awashed with the silence of sacredness in everything. Rejoice over the beats of the drum of love. Rejoice. Behold the paradox.
hope you enjoyed this episode. You can find links and show notes at soulspacepodcast.com. In the next episode, we chat with Hannah Spend about powerful breathing techniques that can alter your body chemistry. Follow us on social media at SoulspacePod, that's SoulspacePod, and leave us a review on iTunes. Thanks for tuning in. Until next time.